All right, hello and welcome back to Basic HTML and CSS Part 3, again with myself and Jerry Humphrey.
Hello.
And today, basically, here's what's new in this training. We're going to talk about W3C validation. If you're not familiar with the initials W3C, it stands for the World Wide Web Consortium, the group of individuals and companies that have come together basically to create web standards. We're going to talk about HTML validation for HTML 4.01, which is basically the doc type that we were using when we built the mini site. We're going to go ahead and go through the entire validation process to validate it as HTML 4.01. Then we're going to transition over and get it to validate as XHTML, a specific version 1.0 transitional. We'll talk a little bit about the different doc types for XHTML also. And then we're even going to go so far as to get it to validate as HTML5 and talk just a few minutes about HTML5 and kind of, you know, that's obviously where everything is headed. Everything is headed towards HTML5, at least near term. No one knows what will happen behind HTML5, but that's where everything is going. So we'll talk just a little bit about that. And you'll see how easy it is, or it can be at least, to get a document to validate as HTML5 if you've already previously validated it as XHTML 1.0 transitional. Also, we're going to talk about background images, some different styling options you have when using background images. We're going to talk about different image usage, not just images that are used in the background, but also images that are used on the page. Talk a little bit more about CSS styling. We're going to create some new looks, basically very simple, but just some things that can kind of set the page off a little bit more than it currently is. I mean, it looks nice right now the way we left it, but we're gonna basically spice it up a little bit. And then we're going to talk about external CSS style sheets. Right now, all of our CSS that we're using is internal. It's basically on the same page along with our HTML. We're going to move it off of that and move it to its own page and talk about that process and how it's done. So I think that this is going to be a whole lot of fun, and I do think that you're going to have some aha moments as we go through this. You're going to hopefully see a few things that you may have thought about or may have wondered about, you know, how it was done, and or especially as the validation process is concerned, you might get some aha moments there as well, which is what we are hoping. So with that, we'll get out of here and we'll start. All right. So what you're looking at now is just a local copy of the mini site HTML file, the same one that we sent out or gave to you basically as part of the original source code along with last session. So that's basically where we're going to start. If we take a look at the actual source code in the background, and this is not the page, so I apologize. Let me open this one up. We want to be in, test page, sales page. Okay, so this is the code of the page that we just saw live, and you'll notice at the very top, when we ended last session, we used the doc type declaration, which is this top line here. Shortened, you know, people just call it doc type. You'll also hear it called the DTD, which you'll see right here, which stands for doc type declaration. And you'll notice that we're telling the browser that currently we are coding this page in HTML. I guess I should have highlighted that as well, but HTML 4.01, which is this part. You also notice that it says the word transitional. Depending upon the particular doc type, there might be multiple variants of the same. So for instance, in this case, this is really HTML 4.01 transitional. There's also HTML 4.01 strict, HTML 4.0 frame set. I'm not going to get into those different variants and the hows and whys. Obviously, strict is probably pretty understandable. It's a more strict standard. You can get away with a few things inside of the transitional version of the doc type that you necessarily can't get away with in the strict. As far as what the frame set variants are, I'm going to kind of just sidestep that. It's really, I don't personally use it, but it's really only used if you're trying to use what's referred to as HTML frames, which are completely different than iframe. So for most of you, probably you won't have to ever worry about using the frame set doc type. It probably won't come up. We're going to use the transitional for both 4.01 HTML and also 1.0 XHTML. So again, we're going to start off with it exactly as it is. We'll go through the validation process. I know that it'll fail. We'll go through the hows and whys in regards to why it failed, and we'll fix it. And then once we get it fixed up and validated, we'll just continue on the process and switch it over to XHTML, go through the validation process again, and then we'll do it again when we switch it over to HTML5. So with that, we're going to start with the page exactly as you have it now. I haven't made any changes to it. I just wanted to point that out. What we're going to do with the live page is this. I am, again, at the moment, I'm using Firefox as my browser. You don't have to. You could use Chrome as well. Both are good options for web development. I have an add-on added to Firefox. It's a free add-on. You can get it. It's called Web Developer. And it's creating all of these options here on this last row. One of the reasons why I really like the Web Developer add-on and why I typically use Firefox for initial web work is because of this add-on, to be quite honest. This one even more so than the other add-ons that I do use, and we'll talk about that later. But one of the things that I use, yeah, Jerry?
Just want to say there's web developers also available for Chrome.
Okay, there you go. So it wasn't a while back, but apparently they've
Right.
created the same add-on for Chrome now. So
Yeah.
Jerry's a big Chrome aficionado and a fan, and he's going to be, you know, he tries to push me in that direction, and I resist because I'm pig-headed. But that's cool. So you'll kind of get to see kind of both worlds as we go along. They're both really good for web development. It's just that Jerry prefers Chrome to Firefox. So back to Firefox and the Web Developer add-on. Again, like I said, you have all of these different options. One of the options is here under Tools. And again, you don't have to use the Web Developer add-on in order to use the W3C validation. You can do it without. But here's one of the reasons why I like the Web Developer tool. And if I click on this, you'll see I have immediate access to try to click the button to validate the CSS or validate HTML, etc. But these only work for pages that are live on servers. At the very bottom, however, you'll see that it says validate local CSS and validate local HTML. These are for use whenever you're trying to validate a page that's not technically online. You know, this is only a page that's sitting on my own desktop machine, which is why it's referred to as local development as opposed to developing it in a full, real server environment. So all I'm going to do is just, again, click on Tools from the Web Developer icon. I'm going to scroll down to Validate Local HTML, and you'll see what happens. We get a little idea that it's working, and it's taken us directly over to the W3C markup validation service. So you'll see right now it's saying that errors were found when checking the document as HTML 4.01 transitional. Now, how does it know that's what I'm trying to get it to validate as? It knows this, of course, because of the doc type. Because the doc type declaration is right at the top of the page, and I'm telling the browser and the W3C that this is the code standard I'm trying to use for this page, it obviously uses that variant of the validator in order to try to validate it. The result are 6 errors and 9 warnings. Okay, so here's what you do when this happens. There's some other information here too. It's saying that the character set encoding that it used to do the validation is UTF-8, which is the most widest in use, basically. Again, the doc type was telling it that it's HTML 4.01 transitional. The root element it's an HTML document. Okay, so if we scroll down now, we're going to get specific information in regards to why it failed validation. So the first thing it says is that there's no character encoding found, and so that it fell back basically to the encoding UTF-8. You don't have to fully understand character encoding, but just know that UTF-8 is typically recommended for most web development, you'd have to have a very specific reason to want to use a different character set. So if you don't have specific knowledge or have a specific reason to use some other character set or character encoding, as it's also referred to, then my recommendation is to simply use UTF-8. Well, in the code itself, we didn't actually declare that we intended to use that particular character set, and that's why this warning is coming up. It's saying it couldn't find that we actually declared what character set we wanted to use, and so it's throwing an error. Down here, you'll see that it's actually giving us some links for tips. You'll see there's a link for a few tips on how to declare it. Here's some official names for the character encodings. And I think it's this one that is the one I typically click on, and we're going to do that now. So we'll go to official names for character encodings, and that's not the right one. We'll go to few tips and see if this is the right one. Yeah, this is the right one here. So go to the few tips, and you'll scroll down. You'll see declaring encodings. Well, this is how to do it. Well, you'll see right here for HTML or XHTML, which is served as HTML, which is what we're doing, you should always use the meta tag inside of the head area. So here's a meta tag, and this is where it's declaring the encoding. You'll see this last bit says that the content of this page is going to be text and or HTML, and that the char set or character set should equal UTF-8. So basically this declares it. Now, these last two boxes here, there's only one difference. In typical HTML, these meta tags are not self-closed. By that I mean they don't have this trailing or this ending forward slash at the end before the last angle bracket. So that's the only difference between these two. So if we're trying to get it to validate as standard HTML, you want to use this one. If you're trying to get it to validate as either XHTML or HTML5, you want to use the one on the bottom. So I'm going to just copy this line of code, the meta tag, Control-C to my clipboard, and we'll go back to Edit Plus. So if you recall what it just said, it said that it wants us to declare the encoding, and it wants us to do it, oops, should have gone the other way. It wants us to declare it in the head section, so somewhere between the opening head here and the closing head, which is below. Well, you'll see already that there's a couple of meta tags already here, so what we can do is just paste it right underneath the last. So that's all we've done so far. We've added the meta tag, where now we're basically declaring the encoding to be UTF-8. And that was the first issue that the validator said that it had with our validation process. So let's get rid of this page. We'll go back to the document. I'll refresh. Now all we've done is added that one meta tag. We'll just validate it again. Tools, validate local HTML. It's going to go back to the validator. Still found 6 errors, but instead of 9 warnings, it found 7. So we're getting a little bit better. So the question is, okay, well, what else? All right, so here we go. Right here, it's saying that, and you can see that the area in red, in our line breaks, we've actually used the self-closing method, which is necessary for XHTML and for HTML5. But again, in HTML, these tags were not self-closed. They were simply just BR by themselves and nothing else. Also, you'll notice down here a little bit farther, it doesn't like the entity that we use for apostrophe. We used the ampersand APOS semicolon right here, and it doesn't like that. And I'll be honest, I don't honestly know why it doesn't like this. I've double-checked that the entity is correct, but it doesn't like it. I'm going to show you how we're going to fix it anyway. And you'll notice down here, and this happens very frequently, that a lot of these errors are exactly the same. So this one is in regards to that HTML entity. It doesn't like the usage of the ampersand APOS semicolon. So is this one, so is this one, so is this one, etc. So once we fix it once, we'll get rid of all of that. Similarly, this is the same issue with the line break. It doesn't want that / in it, so is this. Coming down a little bit further, it's the same issue here. Down here, it's back to the entity with the apostrophe, the apostrophe, the apostrophe. Just keep coming down and look at all of your errors. Apostrophes, 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 line breaks. It's pretty much it. So one thing that you can do, we got a new one here. We'll go fix the apostrophes and the line breaks, and then we'll see those go away, and we'll see that this one stays because there's a new issue here. So let's do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change all of the line breaks. So right now we know anywhere where we have, and I'll just keep coming down into the code until we get to the actual on-page content. Anywhere that we have a line break here that includes the /, we know that in HTML 4.01 it doesn't like this. So I'm going to copy it, just highlight the whole thing and copy it to my clipboard. I'm going to put my cursor somewhere above the page content. I'm going to use an Edit Plus, search, and then replace. Again, you can do this with just Notepad as well. There's find and replace in Notepad as well. So we're going to tell Edit Plus to find that specific code that we just pasted, the line break with the /, and we're going to replace it with simply the line break just surrounded by angle brackets, no /. I'll click the Replace All button. At the bottom, it's told us that 6 occurrences have been replaced, so there was 6 occurrences of that happening. I'll close it and I'll save the page, and we fixed that. If we go back now, even though we haven't fixed the apostrophes just yet, let me get rid of the validator. If we refresh and go through the validation process again, you're going to see that we're doing better. We still have 6 errors, but now we only have 1 warning, which we started as 9. Okay, so the other errors, how do those get fixed? Well, let's go over to the w3schools.com website. This is a website that I still use heavily because there's just a lot of good content here, and it's very well laid out as well. And of course, it comes right from the source. So I'm going to put in HTML entities, and we're going to search on that. And let's see here. So we get the reference, HTML symbol entities reference. That's probably a good place to start. And here we go. So down here we're getting specific characters, we're getting entity numbers, and then entity names. It's typically the entity names that I use. But this isn't giving us the standard ones. Okay, so let me go back to here and let's look at this one. I want to see the standard. Yeah, here we go. Looks like it. Let's see. This has the copyright, but it doesn't have everything. So just a quick search of it is going to yield. I know it's on the site, but here's what I want to point out at the moment. You'll notice that there's an HTML entity name, like for and non-breaking space, for adding an actual space, and this is the one that we've been using in our testing. But there's also an entity number. You can use either. Either should work absolutely fine. Let's go to entities reference and see if we get it. Yeah, there we go. So here we go. Yeah, Jerry?
I was just going to point out it was at the link that said more.
Okay.
On the previous page. So
we found it on this particular page, and we'll make sure that everybody gets this. But reserved characters in HTML, you see it starts up here, and here's the most basic ones. Again, the quotation marks, the apostrophes, the ampersand, the less than and greater than symbols. Well, it's the apostrophe that we're dealing with right now, and you'll see that right at the moment we've used and APOS semicolon, which is the correct entity name. So why it's failing validation, I honestly can't tell you, because in my opinion, we haven't done anything wrong. But I can tell you, because I've previously done this work, that switching it to the entity number fixes it. So what we're going to do, like I said, you can use either. Instead of the and APOS semicolon, we're going to use this entity number, which also is an HTML entity that represents the apostrophe symbol. So we'll go back into Edit plus, we'll do another search replace. This time I'm going to just type in and APOS semicolon, and we're going to replace that entity name with the entity numerical value that we just copied from the w3schools.com website. Okay, I'll click replace all. 4 occurrences happened, it says. We'll save this page and we'll go back and refresh and try to revalidate. So we've refreshed the page. We'll go to validate it again. And okay, we're getting close. It says we have 1 error left. And the error that we have left is this. You'll see again, anytime that you find the issue, it's going to put it in red. It says that there is no attribute border. So what does this mean? Because obviously it's outputting the content actually from our own page, and you can see that there is absolutely an attribute for border. So why is it saying that there is no attribute border? It's not saying that we didn't add it. It's saying that there shouldn't be an attribute border basically for this particular HTML element. Well, this part of the code we didn't actually write or create. It's part of the HTML button code that we got from PayPal. So what it's basically saying is in HTML 4.01 transitional, in this particular doc type, you cannot use the attribute border for this particular element. So the question is, well, what element is it referring to? And here's another thing to look at right here. It says line 191. And this won't always be exactly accurate, but it's a good place to start. So pay attention to the line number. If you're using a text editor that has line numbers, as you can see here on the left-hand side, each individual line has a numerical value. Frequently it will be accurate, although maybe not always. In this case it is. So if we look at line 191, you'll see that the tag type is an input, which is part of form code. But it's saying that we're using the attribute border equals 0. Well, this is typically used for an image, not typically used for the input tag. It's not that it's wrong for other code types, but for HTML 4.01 transitional, this attribute can't be used. So all we're going to do is basically just delete that attribute, border equals in quotes 0, save the page, go back to our local copy, refresh, and then guess what's going to happen? We got rid of the last error, and we get this beautiful green statement that says this document was successfully checked as HTML 4.01 transitional. So we now have a validated page. So if you've heard people talk about W3C validation or valid HTML or valid CSS, this is the process basically that you go through to check your work against the W3C validator and to get it to validate. Also, should you really want to, the W3C is providing this really beautiful, and I say that tongue-in-cheek because I think it's gross and ugly, but this this button here at the bottom that if you wanted to, you could add this little bit of HTML to your page and show the world that your page is valid or validated with the W3C as HTML 4.01. So that's what that's for. So we've gone through W3C validation once now for the document in the HTML transitional doc type. What if that's not the doc type we wanted to use? What if we wanted to use something that's more current? HTML 4.01 transitional is definitely an old standard, and we have much newer standards, including a variety of variants inside of XHTML. So let's go back to the W3C, w3schools.com. And again, it's the number 3, w3schools.com is where we're at. And this time let's put in XHTML doc type. Do a search for that. It should come up pretty quickly for us. XHTML doc types. Okay, so you'll notice here a few things. It says in XHTML, number 1, the doc type is mandatory. So this isn't something, your page will still work if you leave the doc type off, but it's not good practice. It's bad practice to do that, and it won't validate. It'll never validate if you don't include a doc type. So that's what else you need to know. It also gives you some other information. It basically says it has 3 parts. It's got the doc type declaration. You have to have a head section. You have to have a body section. Well, of course, we already have the head and body. So what we need to do is add the doc type declaration. Also, though, if you come down here lower in the XHTML sample, you're going to notice that they've got the basic foundation for an XHTML page. In this case, it is what I already want to use, 1.0 transitional. Again, there are different variants of XHTML. For right now, I want you to learn, and for the moment, probably it's best that you actually code your pages in XHTML 1.0 transitional, and then once you get a really good hang of how to do that, moving to either 1.1 of XHTML or moving to HTML5 will be relatively easy for you. So this is the right doc type I want, but you'll notice something else here. The HTML tag, it's not like it was. You know, if I scroll up the page a little bit, initially we have an HTML tag that looks like this one I'm highlighting up here. It just says HTML. This one now has something else. Now, like the doc type, which I told you has a URL path to where the browser can look for the standard, basically the information that the browser needs to understand how to decipher the standard. There's also another another URL rather right here. This points to what's called the XML namespace, which is what XML-NS stands for, XML namespace. We're not going to get into what an XML namespace is. Just note that when you paste a doc type, a declaration for XHTML, you don't just want this, oops, you want everything including this. So we want to switch out our code, even including the HTML tag, to include this additional attribute for the XML namespace. So I'm going to Control-C to copy that to my clipboard. We'll open Edit Plus, scroll back to the very top of the page, and you'll see right now again we have the initial doc type for 4.01 transitional, and we have the HTML tag completely by itself. I'm just going to highlight both of those, and I'm going to Control-V to paste and Control-S to save. So now what we have is we have the page validated as, it's not validated yet, but we have the doc type basically switched over to say now we want the browser to try to render this page as XHTML 1.0 transitional. And that's all we've done, is just the addition of that segment that we just copied from w3schools.com. And actually, while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to save this. I'm going to save this with the XHTML just verbiage here, so I know that that's what I've done. It's still going to be .html. Don't get confused about that. I just changed the actual page name to salespage-xhtml so I can keep track of what I'm doing. Let's go back to the browser. Let's first get rid of this page. We're no longer using it. Let's open up and view in the browser the new version, XHTML. Okay, it looks exactly the same. There's no visual difference whatsoever. But let's go through the validation process again. Again, validate local HTML. And now we're trying to validate it as XHTML 1.0 transitional, and you'll see that we have 13 errors. So we had completely validated it already as HTML 4.01. It was perfect, basically. And now just switching the doc type, you can see that it says, well, wait a minute, now you've got problems again. So just understand the process. Here's what we're having a problem with. In XHTML, every HTML tag has to be opened and then closed. The problem is, we talked about this earlier, some HTML elements, I was going to say entities, but I meant elements. Some HTML elements, like the meta tag element, they don't have a corresponding closing tag. So it's not proper to put in angle brackets, /meta. I don't know why they decided not to do that, but that's just the way it works. So whenever you encounter what is referred to as an empty element, it needs to be what they call self-closed. And you can see it's right here, the words, you need to self-close an element. That is to say it needs to end with the / angle bracket instead of just the angle bracket. So all of the meta tags need to be self-closed. Well, what else needs to be self-closed? Remember all of those line breaks that we had to remove the self-closing feature to get it to validate as HTML? Well, we got to put them all back. So let's do that. And then we'll come back and check it again and go through some more. So now we're back into our document in Edit Plus. We now have 3 meta tags right here at the top. And again, like I said, all 3 of these need to be self-closed. Oops, I just wanted to click. I'm going to space and then put the /, and that's how you self-close it. This one already had a space, so I'll just put the /, and this one here needs a space and a /. So that's it. Just putting this / indicates that this meta statement, this meta element is done. This next one, again, this indicates that that particular statement is finished. So we fixed those 3. Again, with the understanding that those line breaks that we fixed to get it to validate as HTML 4.01 are now improper in XHTML. The good thing about switching this to XHTML 1.0 transitional is that it's better written code and it's in keeping with what's happening in HTML5. So we don't have to basically undo it again, which is a big benefit. So I'm going to come back up here in the code. We'll go through the search replace feature again. This time, though, we're going to basically go backwards. We're going to find the old line break code that isn't self-closed, and we are going to switch it back with the line break that has the space and then the /. And that's the only difference in these 2 pieces of code. We'll go through replace all. We've seen that 6 occurrences have changed there, and we changed the 3 meta statements, the meta elements earlier. So going back to the live local copy and refreshing, we'll go through validation again. Okay, so we're getting a lot closer. We still have 4 errors. Let's go take a look at what those are. Okay. Again, this is the same issue, but now for the input tag. Inputs are, basically it's part of a form code. Inputs are another special HTML tag that do not have a closing input tag after it. So it's the exact same issue. All of the input tags or input elements need to be self-closed. Works exactly the same way, just adding that / to the end of the particular element. So that's all we need to do there. Over here it says start tag was here. This might be confusing, but it's basically it's in regards to the same thing. And this is one of the things I think that freaks a lot of people out. They'll get a lot of validation errors, and they don't realize that actually fixing one issue can actually fix or get rid of a ton more errors. And this one will go away once we fixed the other. You just kind of have to learn that by experience. Right here, again, it says the end tag for input was omitted, which is the same exact issue as before. So we have problems with our input tags. Let's see. End tag for input, same issue. When it says the start tag was here and you're looking and it's talking about the input tag again, it's the same issue. Lastly, we have an image. Image tags are another tag that are self-closed. So there's no closing img tag also. So we need to look for image and we need to look for input. Get rid of the validation, go back to Edit Plus, and we'll just kind of look at our code. Well, if we have images all over the place, then the way to do it would be to do a search replace or at least a find. I'll show you the find. Let's say that let's say we had a whole lot of images on our page and it was going to take a while to actually look through them with our eyes. You could do a search find, put in just IMG, and click find. Well, it's automatically going to take you to the position in the code where that image shows up, and once you've fixed it, you can click find again. It'll take you to the next. I'm not going to bother with that because I think we only have one right now on this page. So you can see that it's taken us to line 194, the image tag, and you'll see over here that that image was not self-closed, and it needs to be. So I'll space / and we've self-closed it. It's also taken us to the same place where all the input tags are, because this is part of the PayPal button code. So each one of these input lines, there's 3 of them, these need to be self-closed as well. Okay, now you might say, well, what about like div class equals order button? Well, that one actually is fully closed, and you can see that it's closed down here, / div, and we included the HTML comment that was the end or the closing tag for the order button div. Same thing with form. We opened the form tag here, but you can see that the form tag is fully closed with this element here. So again, just have to understand which HTML tags do have full open and closing tags and which ones are self-closed. By and large, it's going to be the input tags, it's going to be your image tags, it's going to be your line breaks, and then you're also going to find the same thing happens with a lot of the code that happens up here in the head area, with the exception being the title. You see that the title tag has an opening and a closing. So we fixed the self-closing issue for the input tags. We fixed the self-closing issue for the image tag as well. We'll go back to the local page, refresh, and try it one more time and see what we get. And that's what we want. We got the green statement that again tells us that we have now validated this. So we now have a document that was originally validated as HTML 4.01. We changed the doc type declaration. We also changed the little bit of code that was housed in the HTML tag to include the URL for the XML namespace. And once this was done, once this was added, basically we went through the process to validate it again, making sure that any empty element like these meta tags and the inputs and the images and the line breaks were all self-closed. And that's really all it took to completely fix this page up. So before we go further and move over to HTML5, let's take a peek at the CSS as well. This time we'll get rid of this. Go back to the document. We use tools. We'll validate local CSS. We'll take a look and see what it thinks about our CSS. Okay. There are different levels of CSS as there are different levels or different types of HTML documents or doc types. You'll see that it's using 2.1, CSS level 2.1 to do this validation. Of course, there was CSS level 1 earlier, then there was 2. The most heavily used right now is 2.1, which is why the validator immediately tries to check for 2.1. And the newest version of CSS is 3. CSS 3 offers some really cool stuff that you can't do in level 2.1, but it, like HTML5, isn't fully supported across all browsers. So right at the moment, my recommendation to you will be to build build pages in XHTML 1.0 transitional and make sure that your pages, if at all possible, validate for CSS level 2.1. That will ready you for upgrading to HTML5 and CSS3. There's nothing wrong with using HTML5 right now, and we'll see that here in just a minute, provided you're not using some of the more experimental tags that necessarily aren't they're not widely supported yet by the browsers. A lot of people ask me all the time, well, why aren't you coding everything in HTML5? And the problem is that standard is still in development, and so it's still kind of a moving target. And you're going to see a very real example of that here when we validate this as HTML5. So with that, we've validated now the page twice, and let's validate it as HTML5. Let's move to the cutting edge. You're going to laugh when you see this, I think. So we'll go back to just the w3schools.com. This time we are going to put in the HTML5 doc type. I'll take a peek at it. All right, so what does the HTML5 doc type look like? And here's a beautiful thing. Oops, a little bit too low. The entire doc type declaration for HTML5 is simply this. That's it. There's no URL. There's not a whole lot of information. It's very, very basic. As a matter of fact, it's short enough you could learn it and just type it if you wanted. You'll also notice in the HTML tag that it doesn't require the XML namespace. So all we need to do to switch this over from XHTML 1.0 transitional to try to get it to validate as HTML5 is just switching these two lines. So I'll copy those. We'll open up Edit Plus, and we'll switch back, basically. We'll get off of this and move to simply this. You'll see that we have a very basic doc type, and we have just the regular HTML open tag. One thing to remember is that the doc type declarations, these are not HTML tags. I think that gets something that's confused a lot. You'll notice that this doc type declaration starts with an exclamation point, and they all do. So you won't find a standard HTML tag that ever begins with the exclamation point. The only other thing that you'll typically use that starts with an exclamation point is the CSS, I'm sorry, the HTML comment codes that we used before. But the doc type declaration is a declaration. It's not an HTML tag. So don't get confused and think, oh, that was my HTML tag. I don't need this. This won't work. They're two completely different things. So this is the actual HTML tag, and this is the doc type, and they are completely separate. So with that, let me just changed that. We'll save this with the HTML5 additional so we can kind of keep this separated. And let's see, what are we going to do? We will go back to the browser. We'll get rid of this document. We will open up the HTML5 version. Again, looks identical from a user standpoint. Doesn't appear to be any change whatsoever. Now when we go through validate local HTML, we are going to see already, without doing anything else other than switching the doc type, the page already validates as HTML5. Well, it says it passed, but wait a minute, what about these two warnings? What does that mean? Let's go take a look at it. Right here is something that you need to be aware of, and this is one of the reasons why I kind of laugh or am resistant when people say, why aren't you coding everything in HTML5? Even the W3C itself is telling you that it's using an experimental feature, the HTML5 conformance checker, basically the horsepower behind this validator. It's experimental. And the reason that is because actually at the moment, HTML5 is experimental. It's not yet a standard. If you look at the W3C's website, they will tell you that at the moment, they don't even recommend that you build web pages in HTML5. They recommend that you build them in XHTML. So I'm hoping that answers that for the time being. Of course, that's going to change in the future when they do standardize it. The other warning that it's giving us is saying that the border attribute is obsolete. So this is part of, I can tell looking at the URL here, the PayPalObjects.com. This is part of the PayPal button code, and I can tell you that this is what's called a tracking pixel. We won't get into what tracking pixels are. It's a tiny little pixel transparent image that has a width of 1 pixel and a height of 1 pixel. But inside of this, if we look at line 192, there's an attribute that has specified the border for the image to be 0. And all it's saying is it's recommending that we remove the border through CSS rather than adding it as a border attribute. It's using the term obsolete. So for images in HTML5, what you need to know is that the border attribute for images is obsolete in HTML5, so it would be best not to use them. However, it's not mad enough about that particular issue so as to not validate it, because it's already validated. If, however, we wanted to remove it, we could, and I'll show you that here in just a second. But what we can't remove is this experimental feature. So just so you know, this isn't something that you've done. They're just telling you, they're giving you a warning that the validation tool itself is experimental. Go back to the code. We'll look at the actual PayPal button code. Said it was on line 192, if you remember, which is here. And you'll notice that this says border equals 0. This is the attribute that it doesn't like. So we'll go ahead and get rid of it. Now, getting rid of that could allow a small border line to show up around this teeny little tracking pixel, which again, we're not going to get into the specifics of the hows and whys a tracking pixel is used, but just know it's this tiny little transparent image, but if we allow the border line to show up around it, the border line might appear to our visitors and just seem weird, and we don't want that. So we want to set border of 0 or border none on this particular image tag, but we don't necessarily want to set border none maybe on every single image on the site. Maybe we only want to set border none for this specific image. So this is where we get into a little bit more of a deep understanding in regards to CSS. Well, how do we do that? How do we tell it to not display a border on just this one image, and maybe we want to use an image somewhere else than we do want a border on? Well, understand that this image tag is contained inside of a couple other tags, right? There's a form tag wrapped around it right there. There's also a div tag wrapped around it here. This div tag has a class of order button, and you can see that right here. So div with a class, again, remember that classes basically relate to the period to precede the name of order button. I'm going to copy order button so I can make sure I get it right. We'll go back up into the code, and we already have a div, or we have the class of order button right there. I'm going to come underneath it, and I could add it straight to here, but I want to show you something. I'm going to type div dot, and I'm going to put order button. I'm going to put the two opening and closing curly brackets, and I'm going to say, well, what do we want to do? Anytime that you find a division with a class of order button, I take that back. I need one other thing. I need image. I want you to do border. Oops, none. Let's break this down real quick. Starting from the right, it says if you find an image tag, and if you find that image tag inside of a division with a class of order button, again remembering that these two are tight together, then this is what I want you to do. I want you to remove the border line. So I could use a different image on the page somewhere, and it would still have the ability to show a border line because I haven't turned it off for images as a whole. I could And if I wanted to do that, I would simply just get rid of the div.order button. I would make it like this. I would say anytime that you encounter the image tag, make sure that you do not display a border around the image. That would also work, but this would remove it from all images as opposed to potentially just the one inside of that PayPal button area. So I'm hoping that makes sense. I'm hoping you get an idea of how you use what's referred to as descendant selectors. This is a descendant. This is a descendant of this. The image tag is basically nested inside of a division with a class of order button. So if we save this, go back to the live example, get rid of that, refresh, validate local HTML, right? We removed that second warning. The only warning that remains is the fact that W3 Schools is telling you that it's using the experimental HTML5 conformance checker. And like I said, you can't get rid of this. So if you get to this point with an HTML5 document, you've gone as far as humanly possible. Okay, so that is a really good understanding of the validation process and kind of the hows and whys of the associated doc types. So with that, I think the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to show one other thing before we start messing with the page again, and that's basically this. A lot of people say, well, wait a minute, I saw, one of your sites or one of your themes and it doesn't fully validate what gives. HTML validation and CSS validation is definitely something that you should strive for, but you should also know that just because something doesn't validate doesn't necessarily, it's not that it couldn't be wrong, but doesn't necessarily make, it's not a definitive statement that something wrong. We're at Google, and I am going to use the Web Developer tool again, this time to validate a page that's live. And we're going to validate Google's own HTML. We'll take a peek. All right, well, here's what we get. Obviously, they're trying to validate as HTML5, and they got 36 errors and 2 warnings. And if we come down in the page, of course, we understand this one. But what about all these others? There is a good deal of errors. Of course, probably many of them are the same thing. And I'm not going to go through and try to teach you how to fix Google's website, but you get the idea. Google is, kind of a big site, said tongue-in-cheek, and even it currently doesn't validate as HTML5. Well, what about its CSS? We could probably check that too. Didn't like that one, so I guess it's not going to let us try to validate the CSS. But
you need to go to Google first and then validate it.
Oh, did I try to validate the validator?
Yeah.
That doesn't work. No, I was at Google. No, it's not happy with me. But you understand, basically, even Google itself didn't validate, and that's just the way it is sometimes. That doesn't mean that just, you should put up a page and validate and say, it doesn't validate, neither does Google, so who cares? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is just understand that there are some valid reasons at times that things won't validate, and that discussion is much longer than we have time for. It's much more complex than we can get into. But I just wanted to show that just because you see something and it doesn't fully validate, don't necessarily just paint it with the understanding that you believe that somebody's done something wrong or it's bad code. That may not be the case. It's not to say that it couldn't be the case, but it may not be the case. So let's see. With that, let's get back to our project, and let's go back. Let's play with the XHTML version as opposed to the 5. I'll close this document here, and actually I'm going to open up one of the ones that I've already been tweaking so we can speed this process up. Let's see. Apologize, it's in 2. Maybe not. All right, well, we have some other stuff to test. It doesn't matter if I have to do it live. I'll do it completely live. That's fine too. I think we're okay though. Let's go to test page. These are the ones that we created. All right, let's go to the XHTML page, which is what we had open just a minute ago, although I can tell you that I inadvertently messed with let's see. All right, we'll go get it live again. We're looking for the XHTML doc type. Apologize for that. Again, we need these two statements for XHTML. We'll replace it there. And now we're back to the real use of XHTML. Okay, so here's the page. It's an XHTML page again. It validates. That's all good, but it's back to the way we had it. Let's do some things to spice this up a little bit. First, we're going to talk about just the use of some CSS colors, and then we'll get into use of some images, both background images in a variety of different ways too. So we'll open up the code, and we'll take a peek down here at our divs. So right now, we have the opening body tag, and then the very first div on the page is the main container div, which if you remember what the CSS is telling it to do, it's telling it to be, 750 pixels wide. It's giving it a particular amount of padding, which I believe is 20 pixels on the left and right, for a total width, because again, padding makes the area grow, to 790 pixels in width. It's making the area white in the background with a dark thin line border. That's all being done by the CSS styling that's containing, or controlling rather, the main container div. Let's say that we wanted to put something above it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create a new div. I'm just going to open it with div ID equals, and then in quotation marks, header. Again, there is nothing specific about that word header. It's just commonly used because it talks about something that comes at the head or the top of the document. I could name this Cool Live Demo for all I matter. It doesn't matter. You can use what you want to use. Just use something that makes sense to you, the web developer, such that you can understand basically your code later on when potentially you've left this page for a month and your client wants you to go back and look at it or add something new. You use something that makes sense for you. So I'm going to use header because that makes sense to me. I'm also going to use the closing tag. Again, it's kind of best case practice to close it immediately and then move it where you need to move it if you do need to move it anywhere. And I'm going to include the HTML comment. Again, this is optional. Let's see. I'm trying to remember how I've been doing those. And I just put header div. Again, this is optional, entirely up to you. This just gives me a reminder that that was the div that ended the header division. Okay, so right at the moment, there's no content here. It's just simply just a new div that has a particular name. That's all it is. And I think this is one of the things I wanted to teach, because I think a lot of people get confused. They think that every time you have a div, there has to be something between it. And there is quite frequently, but it doesn't have to be. And here's the first example or usage of that itself. We'll go back up into the code now that we have a div with an ID of header. And I don't know, how about right here above the footer? Again, the order of this isn't generally imperative. I do try to keep my IDs together for the most part, and the classes together for the most part, but primarily it really doesn't matter. save a few instances. So now I'm basically saying, okay, whenever you encounter a div with an ID of header, again, ID because of the number sign or the pound symbol, what should you do? Well, the first thing I want you to do is I actually want you to use a background color. And the background color, let's see, what do I want to use? I want you to use, we'll use that same red color that's on the page. I want you to color the header area that dark red. Well, what else do I want you to do? Well, let's see. How tall do I want that area? I can add a height statement. So maybe I want to make it, I don't know, 60 pixels in height. So basically a rectangular band that's going to extend across the whole page that's going to be, and I'm missing a digit, should be 6, and there is now. It's going to be a dark red color, and it's going to be 60 pixels in height. Well, what else do I want it to do? Well, I want it to have a border on the bottom. Remember that I talked about borders. You can do them all in one statement. So I can just have a border statement. If I wanted a border to wrap around the entire rectangular area, I could do it that way. If I just wanted in a specific place, maybe just the top, the bottom, the right, or the left, you can just add that after the hyphen. So border bottom, I want 10 pixels. I want a border bottom underneath this red area that's 10 pixels wide. It's solid. It's not a dashed or a dotted line. And I want this thing to be really dark, almost black. How about 333? We'll use that. So what we've basically done is saying anytime in the code lower on when you encounter a div with an ID of header, I want you to give it basically a background color of this dark red, cause the height of the area to be 60 pixels, and then underneath that 60 pixels, in addition to that, how about a 10 pixel wide border bottom that is a solid line and it's almost solid black. So that's all we've done. We added this one little bit of CSS, and we've added this down in the HTML. We added a div with an ID of header. We close the div, and you'll see, again, there's nothing at all between the opening and closing div tags. All this is just used in conjunction with the CSS to say when you encounter this div, here's what I want you to do. So we'll save that. We'll open it live. We'll refresh. And now we get this. Okay? So now we get this kind of a cool 60 pixel tall red area with a black border bottom that's sitting this particular spot. Well, there's a couple of problems with it. Number one, we've got this unattractive spacing above and to the left. And you can see that it pushed our page down, which of course means that less of our content can be seen immediately upon refresh. And that can be okay at times, but I kind of don't want that either. So let's do this. Let's do two things. Let's say, well, why is that spacing happening to the top? I guess I should point something out. Initially in the code, I think I had the universal selector on, the asterisk. I think I had a statement like this that removed all margin and padding, and I removed that because I really don't want to remove it from everything. Let's remove it though from just the body area. Again, understanding in the code, the very first thing in HTML that it encounters, the first thing that it's going to actually display, with the understanding that the head area isn't displayed, the body tag is the first element. And that body tag, by default, the browser is trying to add margin and padding to it. So if we come up here to the body tag and say, you know what, in addition to the things that we're telling you, we also want to turn margin off, margin : 0 semicolon, that says no margin, top, right, bottom, or left, anywhere. And the same thing with padding. Turn both of those off using just with margin set to 0 and padding set to 0. With that done now, we're going to see this extra space remove. And that's what's causing that to happen. So it was the additional styling that the browser was forcing on us on the body tag itself that was causing that extra spacing. We've gotten rid of it. So that looks pretty cool. But what about this? What about the fact that this is kind of still down here and it's a little bit lower? Can we make this even cooler, very simplistically? And the answer is yes. I told you last session that we can actually use negative margins. You can't use negative padding, but you can use negative margins. Well, what is controlling that sales page portion is the main container div, this right here. So right at the moment, you'll see that we have a margin statement right here, and it's saying to put 30 pixels of margin to the top, and then again, understand it goes top, right, bottom, left. Auto margins on the right and left, which is how it's centering it, and 20 pixels of margin underneath it. And this is fine, but it's this margin right here. It's this 30 pixels of margin that is showing up right here. It's this value that basically after this new header div is finished, give it 30 pixels of space with that margin and then start the main container. Well, we no longer want to do that. We could remove that 30 pixels and make this page really tight to this area, but it wouldn't really look all that attractive. It looks better, in my opinion, if you move the page even further up and break it up over top of this header. And you do that with using a negative margin value. So instead of a 30 pixels or even a 0, let's move it back, I don't know, negative 20. So basically what this says is instead of starting below the header ID above it, let's actually overlap these. Go take a peek at the page. Okay, so now you can see the effect, and we've moved our content higher up and it kind of looks cooler, but I don't think that's anywhere close to making it look good. I think it needs to be much stronger than that. So you can just play around with the value and maybe say negative 40, take another look at it and see if maybe I think that looks a whole lot better. So that accomplishes a couple of things. First thing is it moves our content up higher, and because of the way that the page works, this negative margin value is allowing us to kind of create a cool little effect basically through nothing more than just CSS. So the page looks cooler. It's still very attractive. It's not distracting and taking away from your sales message, but at the same time, it looks a whole lot cooler. The cool thing about using CSS for this type of thing, as opposed to using images, we'll get into images in just a minute, is the fact that you can change them at will. So, for example, maybe I don't want that to be red any longer. I want it to be a different color. We'll go back and get rid of the color altogether. We'll use the built-in color palette for Edit Plus. Click this, and we can choose, a different color. We can go to more. Well, let's just do something in the blue range. I'll click it. You'll see by default it automatically pre-populates the XHTML color for it, which is cool. Speeds that process up. And now, instead of red at the top, we've got blue. And that can be done, literally by just, 2 seconds of time. And now you can have multiple variations. So I'm hoping that's something that's kind of cool. In addition to that, maybe you don't necessarily want that band of color to come exactly, where it is. Maybe you want it to be lower on the page. So let's mess with that real quick. So right now, the header div, basically, it's coming at the very top of the page. We haven't set any margin or padding to it whatsoever. Because it comes first in the HTML, it's the first thing after the body tag, the browser knows to display it first. But you can control the positioning of things a number of different ways, but this time let's control it through just margin. So maybe we add another declaration for margin-top, and we'll make it, I don't know, say 150 pixels. So what this is saying is basically when it encounters the div with an ID of header, to add 150 pixels of margin to the top of it before it starts. Okay, this is going to temporarily, it's going to break things, and I'm doing this on purpose so we can go fix it. Okay, so you'll see what happened, right? We've got the band has moved down, which is cool, but everything moved down. And of course that's because this main container is basically, it's attached to this header div because it comes second. So there's a couple of different ways that you can work with things for now. We're just going to mess with the negative margin value, and we're going to kind of clean up this header styling to do something else too, kind of just playing around with it, having a little bit of fun. So right now we've got a negative value for margin. Let's see here. For the main container of -40. Well, we just moved the header down 150 pixels to the margin top. So let's just add that 150 back to what we already had. We'll test that out. So now we have a main container with a negative of 190. Also, with that header div ID, we had a border bottom of 10 pixels. Now that we've moved it down, let's make it a border top of the same. Just copy this. We'll add a border top declaration of the same value, 10 pixels solid and an almost black color. Take a peek at this now. And there we go. So now we've got this cool kind of a band that's running behind the page. It's got that border top and bottom, which looks better in the particular positioning that it's in, and the page is where it is. Of course, I think the page could go up a little bit more, so we could mess with that as well, but I think you get the idea. So that is just some very simple CSS styling that you can add to kind of spice things up. The next thing I want to get into is background images. Let's talk about a little bit more about images in general, not just background images, but images itself. So here's what we'll do. Well, firstly, we will get rid of the negative margin. We'll set it back to 30. And we will get rid of the header area altogether. Now I'm going to leave the actual header CSS for the moment because we'll be styling probably something with it in a little bit. But here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to basically cause it to stop being affected. We'll come down here to the header, and if I remove the header altogether, which I can do that, if I get rid of it, then no longer can it call out that CSS because it's basically, like I said before, it's a two-part process. When it encounters this, it needs to look for CSS to figure out what to do with it, and if it doesn't have CSS, it won't do anything. Conversely, even if there's CSS, if you never call out the div ID of header, nothing's going to happen. So I'm just going to go ahead at the moment, I'm just going to remove that new division, and we'll save it. We'll go take a look at our page, and it should be back to the way it was initially, right? All right. A lot of people have asked about background images, and I think that's what we're going to deal with next. So one of the cool places that you can go to get a lot of different really cool stuff for web development is a website I'm going to show you right now. I always kind of forget the name of the website itself, so I just type in Google web treats all together, just like this. And of course you can see that it's given us this site, and it's webtreats.mysite.myway.com is the actual website. This site is really cool. This company does build custom WordPress themes and other stuff that it sells, which is why it has obviously a paid arm to it. Basically, there's a reason that it creates all this free stuff. It's creating this free stuff so you go visit their site and hopefully click on some of their banners or buy some of their other products. But what's cool about this site as opposed to many others is that they provide a huge amount of patterns and textures and icons, etc. And the stuff that they provide to you can be used completely for free, even inside of a commercial project, and without an attribution, which basically means you don't have to give them credit, and you can use it in something that you're building for sale. So this is a really cool place, and a place that I would recommend you go check out. We'll go into, let's see, we want to go into textures. I already have some saved. I just wanted to show you textures. When you're looking for textures, you'll see that a lot of these are referred to as tileable or seamless. That just basically means the same thing. Of course, down here they put the two words together, seamlessly tileable. It basically means that the image can be multiplied or replicated horizontally and vertically and kind of look pleasing. So you can, go visit any one of these. It'll show you a variety of different looks. Here's what this one could look like if we wanted to use one of these. We can kind of have this fabric-y looking background, and you can either download them typically all in one. This is all of them together. A lot of times you can download them individually. Okay, I've already downloaded a couple, so rather than mess with anything else, we'll just go grab it. So it's in here. So I don't know. I'll grab the green one. I grabbed 3 of them when I was playing around with it, but realistically they all do the same thing, just with different looks. So I'll copy this one out of here. Make sure that it is inside of our test page folder, and it is called Sample BG3. If I hover over it, it'll tell you the type. It's a JPEG image. So it is samplebg3.jpg if I understand the entire image, which I'll need to in order to add it to my page. So here's what we're going to do. We open up Edit Plus again, and we say, okay, well, where do we add this thing? We're going to add it to the body, meaning the entire page. Initially, right now, we've set a background color, this light gray, but we're not using a background image. To use a background image, what we're going to do is just get rid of the hyphen color, start with just background by itself, and here's how this works. We type in all lowercase URL, basically where is the image that you want to use. In HTML, we call it out as image source. In CSS, it's called out as URL. Then there's the parentheses that come after that, opening and closing, and inside of that is where we tell it what image we want to use. Now, you may see CSS, and I know that the image is samplebg3.jpg. You may see CSS that uses it exactly like this, and it will work. You may see CSS that wraps the image, in single quotes or apostrophes. That will also work. You will also see it where it wraps the image in double quotes or quotation marks, and that will also work. Just understand that each coder has their individual preferences. For me, I can't say I always, because sometimes I default to single quotes, but I typically will use quotation marks around my images. So, yeah, Jerry.
If there's a space in the name, you have to use quotes, from what I understand. Quotes or double quotes.
A space in the image name?
Yeah.
Okay, well then let's fix that. Never, ever, ever have a space in your image names.
It's always a good idea.
That's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
What the browser will do is it'll put a %20 symbol anytime it encounters a space, because URL structures should not include spaces, period. So if you have, when you name your images, just make sure that your images have no spaces. They can have underscores, they can have hyphens, but no spaces. But I didn't even know that myself, so that's really cool. So what Jerry's saying basically is, if you have done this improperly, or if another coder has done this improperly and provided you with an image that's like this, where there's a space as part of the image name, that you would need to wrap it in quotes. Again, my suggestion to you is that you rename the image and get rid of the spaces. Again, by default, I wrap my images in quotes right here. So this is saying, firstly, to now in the background, instead of using a color necessarily, I want you to use an image. And that's that first basically value to the background property. There's a number of other values that we can add to it as well. One thing that you need to know is by default, the browser will attempt to repeat any background image horizontally and vertically. Horizontally being the x-axis, and vertically being the y-axis. So it's going to try to repeat it left and right, top to bottom, which for this particular image is what we want. We purposely chose an image that was tileable, that was repeatable. So we're going to leave that current value alone. We'll come back to it in just a minute. If we didn't want it to repeat, we would use another value. We'll do that, like I said, in just a minute. So we can add the ability for it to either allow it to repeat or not. There's another thing that's called the background attachment, which basically says, okay, do you want the image to be fixed in its position, or do you want it to scroll along with the page? As the user scrolls, do you want the image to scroll, or do you want the image to be fixed and allow the page to scroll? And we're going to show you that too. So at the moment, all I want to do is add a background image to this page. I don't really need to do anything else because, like I said, by default, it will repeat left and right, top to bottom, and by default it will scroll, and both of those are fine for me. The only thing I would say is when you do add background images like this, I would also recommend that you do include a background color. The background color you choose should be as close to the overall color of your background image as is possible. In this case, it's a green. So we'll go figure out what color green it is, and we'll change the statement here in just a minute. Right now, the color is that default light gray. And I'll explain, you're not going to be able to see it live, but I'll explain the hows and whys of what I just said here in just a second. So let's save this and go check it out. And now we have this beautiful background image. Again, it fills the entire space. We both know, you and I, know that this image is only a small square, but it's filling the entire space because of the repeating effect of background images. And if I scroll down, you'll see that the image basically is scrolling with it. Now, this might cause you to need to change the color of your footer links if you get something that's too dark, but that's not something we're going to cover at the moment. Basically just make a mention of it. If you use a darker background than even this, that may force you into restyling these links into something light that can be seen. But here's the reason why you want to use a background color in addition to your images, and why you'd want to choose something that was somewhere close. I'll use a free add-on for Firefox called ColorZilla. It's up here on my top right. I'll click on this. It'll give me this this cross symbol, and if I just move it to certain places, you'll see that there's these values up here changing. And if I just kind of give it to an overall, what's kind of the overall color, maybe something like this, and I click in the area, it will actually copy that color to my clipboard. So when I go back to Edit Plus, and it includes the pound sign, the number sign, I can replace that default light gray with now a color that's very close to that overall green. And when I refresh, we'll see no change whatsoever. The reason we're not seeing any change is because that background image is still being picked up and it's filling the entire area. So the question then becomes, well, why would you also include the color? And the reason is this. Let's say for some reason, and I'll just get rid of the 3, this is now the wrong image name. Our image for our background is not sample BG, it's sample BG3. This image does not exist in this area, so the browser can't find it. And sometimes it happens because you've made a mistake, and sometimes it happens because there's just some hiccup with the browser. So what this background color is over here, it's a fallback. It basically says, look, if there's some problem, if for some reason you cannot properly display this background image, then by all means, please display this color. So if we go back to here now, you'll see that we no longer have the background image because I broke the image name, just to kind of give you an example. But what I do get is I do get that kind of a pleasing green. So at least the look for my visitor is somewhat close to what I was trying to show them. That's the real reason behind it. And of course, if I replace that image back to the way it's properly supposed to be, we get our pretty butterflies again. All right, so that's an understanding of that. What if we change or mess with some of the other values? Let's just see what happens there. So I told you that by default it's trying to repeat, or it will repeat, the image left to right, or in the X axis. Man, I'm having trouble saying that word today. Or vertically in the Y axis. But what if we want to control it? Well, you can control it by adding a number of things. You can add, firstly, to repeat -X. So now that we've given it a specific repeat value, no longer will it repeat top and bottom. It will only repeat left and right. So what does that look like? That looks like this. You can also see the reason why you might want to have the background color, again, because the area that's not filled by the image is then filled with the color. So there's a different reason. If you had an image that you wanted to tile across the top of the page, this is one of the ways that you could do it. Conversely, if we said we don't want it to repeat X, we only want it to repeat Y, of course this isn't going to look good, but for training purposes it's perfect. You'll see that now we have the image that tiles just vertically and no longer horizontally, the rest of the page getting the default green color. Okay, what else? Well, maybe we want to say no repeat. That's your basic options. You can cause an image to not repeat at all, to repeat only in the X, to only repeat in the Y, or again, by default, it will repeat in both axes. If I do this, now we get an image that simply just shows up once in that top left corner and doesn't repeat at all. Now, let's say that we want to repeat it in the X, but we don't want it to scroll with the page. We want to keep it fixed. You'll see what happens with that here in a second. All we have to do, again, it's scroll is the default setting, so you don't have to type it. If you want to fix it, you type fixed. So I simply have a space, and I think I have one too many spaces there. I do. So we're now saying that the image, we want it to repeat horizontally, but rather than to scroll along with the page content, we want to fix it. So when we refresh, we see the image up here, but when I go to scroll the page, you'll see that this content now is independent of that image, and you'll see that it scrolls up over the top of that image, and that image stays fixed in its position. If we put it back so you can see the difference, if I just get rid of this or even change it to scroll, again, you don't have to type scroll, it will use scroll by default. But now with the scroll on, you'll see that the image is going up in conjunction with the page as opposed to staying fixed. And there's some cool things that you can do with that, basically causing some unique looks. So let's see, I think I actually, I know that let's see, let's do repeat fixed for a second. Let's open the folder. I know I created an image so that you could see that with, but I didn't bring it into here. Let's do it here. fixed bgband.png. Okay. And actually, let's bring all those over in case we have time. Let's see. Probably not, though. We're probably just going to do the fixed band here, maybe the header, and then we're going to move on to moving the CSS to an external style sheet and showing that. But we'll use the fixed band here firstly. So this is just a really wide image. You can see that it's 1920 pixels in width by 300 pixels in height. Just this huge, solid image that I created for the training. And it's called fixed-band, bg-band, and it is a .png file, as you can see as I hover over it. So let's say that we want to use that image now in the background, fixed-bg-band.png, and we want to, we're going to use this with no repeat. It's going to be just a once and done image. It's going to be fixed. We'll put the color back to the light gray. And the other thing, though, was, okay, well, what about the positioning of this? You don't always have to move things around with margin and padding. And this is one of the things that I wanted to show you. With background images, there's also the ability to position them in certain places. So again, let's just understand this whole statement. What we're telling it to do for the background is, first, we want to use an image. We want to use this particular image, fixed-bg-band.png. If for some reason it can't find this image, well, we want to use the light gray, but we want it to use the light gray anywhere where the background image isn't anyway. And in this case, the background image is quite small in its height. We don't want the image to repeat. We want it to just be used once and done. We want it to be fixed. In other words, we don't want it to scroll along with the page. We want it to stay in position. But what else can we do? Well, we can actually tell it where we want the image to be. You can do this by pixels, you can do this by names, or you can do this by percentages. So let's start with names. We'll use the word left top. So understand that the positioning of a background image happens firstly horizontally and secondly vertically, just again with the understanding that this is basically the X axis and then the Y axis. So this says to start the image to the very left of the browser window, and this says to start the image at the very top of the browser window. And you'll see what that causes here in just a second. If I've done everything right, hopefully I have, we get this. Okay, so this is pretty cool. It's got a great look to it. Now we're using an image here as opposed to before we were using CSS to change it. So one of the downsides again is if we want to change this to blue, we've got to change the image, not just a CSS value. But it's got a cool look. Also, if I scroll the page, you'll see that the image stays fixed. That's kind of got a cool look to it as well. All right, but maybe we don't want it necessarily all the way up at the top. Maybe we want it somewhere else. Well, how do we do that? We can actually use words again. You have center, bottom, and top basically, and then right and left. So I can use center, and that says make the image start to the far left of the browser, but make it start to the center of the browser window rather than at the top. Save the page, refresh, and now we get it down here simply by using center. And again, it's going to remain fixed on the page. Another cool look. Well, maybe you don't want to use left and right and top and center and bottom. Maybe you want to use something else. You can also, instead of using these words, you can also use, like I said, you can use percentages or you can use pixels. So generally speaking, I told you that when you use 0 values, you don't normally use like pixels or 0 EMs or something else. You just use 0. But in this case, I'm going to use 0 pixels, so I want you to see, I want you to understand it. What I'm saying is from the left-hand side, I want you to start this image 0 pixels over, meaning hard to the browser window. But I also want you to move it over, I don't know, we'll say down from the top 100 pixels. So 0 meaning from the left, hard to the left of the window, and 100 pixels down from the top. So no longer are we using left top or left center, we're using pixel dimensions. And if I refresh, you'll see that we have the ability to start moving this image around in its position. So maybe that's the effect that you want. And of course, if you want, it's close, but I really want this to have a little space between this line, you can move it to 120. You get a little bit more control over it this way than you do, of course, using just top, center, and bottom because it's just not as finite. Similarly, with percentages, instead of using pixels, we can use percentages. So I could use 0% and 10%. And again, what that's saying is 0% means start the image to the hard left and move it down 10%. 10% of the active browser window. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like this. So, what does 15% look like? That looks like that, etc. You get a little bit more control using pixel variants, but I just wanted to see that you can use all three. So with that, I think we're good. Now let's add the header image to this just to kind of spice it up, and then from there, what we're going to do is move the CSS to an external style sheet and talk about that issue, and as well as some path issues that can come up, and then we'll take some questions. So let's move this to a specific spot through pixels. I don't know. We'll see what this looks like real quick. Okay, that's pretty cool. We have the background image fixed in this particular location. Let's add a header image above the main container. So if we look at our working files, you'll see that I have a header demo image. It's just a really simple image, and you'll notice that it's a JPEG, and you'll also notice that the dimensions say it's 790 pixels in width. It's that specific value because I knew in advance that that was the width of our actual page. Again, we caused it to be 750 plus 20 pixels of padding on the left and 20 pixels of padding on the right for a total of 790 pixels in width, which is why I created a quick little demo header that was exactly that width. Okay, so it's header demo.jpg because it's a JPEG image. So let's do this. Let's go back and add in a new div for header. We already had it and we removed it. Again, we want it above the main container. So we'll just put it back. Div ID equals, in this case, header. Again, it could be anything you want. And I'm just going to do just what I did before, including the opening and closing of the div and just a HTML comment that reminds me of what I've done. Now this time, instead of adding the image into the CSS, we're going to add it into the HTML code itself. And this brings up a really important point. You can add a variety of images to your web pages either through the actual on-page HTML or calling it out and adding it through CSS like we've just done with the background image. Here's what you need to know about it. With background images, every image that you add in CSS will be added as a background image. There's nothing that's technically wrong with that, but here's what the difference is. When you add an image like we just did through CSS, you'll notice that there's no ability to add alt text to it. There's also no ability to add title text to it. So there's a little bit less control that you have over the image in regards to on-page SEO, or for search engine optimization. There are very good reasons, and this is one of them, to use background images because you can do things through CSS that you can't do if you add it to the actual HTML itself, but just know that there's a time and place for both. Not every image you add should be used as a background image, and not every image you use should be used in the HTML. You really want a blend of it, and the reason or the understanding of how to use one over the other is kind of same thing. You know, the background images. Well, that's a different topic. Let me not go there. What you basically need to know is all the main images on a web page, those that are not kind of in the background, should be added to the page itself. Generally speaking, there will be some exceptions as we go probably further into this topic. But at the moment, we've created a div ID equals header, and we're going to add the header image right here. We're going to do that with the image tag img. We're going to start with src for source equals, and then in quotation marks, that's where we're going to put the URL or the path basically to where the image is, the name of the image. We're also going to use alt equals because we definitely want alt text. Anytime that we're adding an image to our HTML, we want alt text to be used for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's good for SEO. It's good for users. But in addition to that, it will also stop your pages from validating if you don't use them, if you're using XHTML or HTML5. They both require the use of an alt tag or an alt text. So we're also going to use title equals, and we'll show you that as well. That's basically going to cause what's referred to as a tooltip, or a piece of text that will display over the image if we hover over it. So let's look at all three of these. Now, this statement by itself would be fine for HTML, but there's a problem with it for XHTML, and that is the image tag is one of those that needs to be self-closed. So in order to finish this up properly, we need a space and / and self-close the image tag. All right. So what's the source of this image? Well, at the moment, it's just the image name, headerdemo.jpg. What is the alt text we want to use? This will only be displayed to the visitor if for some reason the image itself can't be displayed, or if the user is disabled and using a screen reader, a device that actually reads the page and speaks the content out loud, it will speak to them the alt text. So again, understand that this is important both for visitors. It's also important for SEO. So I don't know, I'm just going to put header image for the alt text. For the title text, I'm going to put this is the title text, just because I want you to see the difference. Now, this will work just fine. You don't have to put anything more than this. But I will tell you, in my opinion, if you're going to add images to your HTML, you should generally be also including the specific sizing of the image, both its width and its height. Those attributes can come anywhere that you want. This positioning is not important. You can have the title come before the alt, etc. We'll just go ahead and add it to the end. Width equals, in quotes, I know that this image is 790 pixels. This brings up something else. When you are adding width and height values to your HTML, you only include the pixel value. You don't include the px. It already knows to expect that you're using a pixel value for it. So width equals, in quotation marks, 790 is the same thing as telling the browser that my image is 790 pixels in width. As far as height is concerned, I honestly don't know what the image is at the moment, so we'll have to go take a peek at it. If we hover over header demo, you can see it's 790 by 150. So the height of the image is 150 pixels in height. So the question then becomes, well, if you can leave those off, if you don't have to add width and height, why do it? And the reason is this. When the browser initially goes to display your content, it will reserve this specific space, 790 pixels wide by 150 pixels in height. It will reserve that space for your image as it tries to display it. If the image is really large, or if the visitor is on a really slow connection that it takes a while for it to serve up this image to them, your content will all be where it's supposed to be, and your image will display to them or appear to them as soon as it's possible for that to happen. If you don't include, if you don't include the width and the height value, the browser doesn't know what kind of spacing would be required for the image. It knows that it wants to display one, but it doesn't know what that value is. So all of your content will be high up on the page, and then as it displays the image, automatically their page will jump and it'll push the content down. So if you include width and height values, that won't happen. That jumping effect stops because, like I said, the browser knows what spacing it needs to allot basically for your image. So that is a complete image statement. Again, the title is not required. You don't have to put this. That's optional, as is the height and the width is optional but recommended. The only thing that you should have at absolute minimum is the first part of this statement. Image source equals where is the image, what is it named, and then include alt text between the quotation marks. Again, in XHTML, make sure that you self-close it and save it. So if this is correct, and I hope I've done that right, we are going to get some wacky stuff. Okay, so here's what's going on. I have some conflicting CSS. We already had styled something for header, and now I've got something new for header. So let me go fix that. We've now added the div ID equals header right here, but the code that I have for header has got some wacky stuff. All I really want it to say now for that div is, number one, I want the width to be equal to 790 pixels. That's the maximum width of our image. I want the margin to be, I don't know, maybe 20 pixels on the top, and auto on the, now let's try that, 20 pixels top and bottom. Again, if you only use two, the first assigns to the top and the bottom, and the second assigns to the left and right. So I'm saying basically center this, which is the auto command, and it will work as long as you have a specific width for a specific value for width. Without this specific width value here for 790 pixels, just note that the browser doesn't know how to automatically space it, because this only works in conjunction with the understanding that it knows what the width is. So with that, we'll save this. It's going to fix the positioning of that, get rid of the blue band that we had styled, and we see what we have here. Okay, so this is the div ID equals header now, and again the CSS is only controlling where it's positioned. 20 pixels of padding to the top, 20 pixels of padding to the bottom, and then we start the main container. So this kind of looks ugly. I think there's a little too much space here. Of course, that header's kind of tall. But maybe what we want to do is we want to move the spacing. Well, we could change the value for the margin in the header, or we could basically, we could move the value for the main container, which comes after it, because it also has 30 pixels of margin at the top of it. So maybe now the margin on the top of the main container will set to 0, because the new header div that we have right above it has a margin of 20 pixels top and bottom. So rather than compounding those two, we'll just let the one value assign it. So now it's 20 pixels. It's no longer the 30. Okay. And if I didn't like that, I could move the background further down. But I think you get the idea. This I just wanted you to show, or I wanted to show you basically so that you could understand that. Let's see. Sometimes, most definitely, excuse me, you'll be adding images to the HTML itself, and sometimes, very specifically, you'll be adding them or basically calling them out inside of the CSS through the background. Okay, so let's just do this last thing. We'll move the style information, all of the CSS. We're going to move it off this page and then show you how to create an external style sheet. And then once that's done, we'll take questions and call it a day for today. So here's what we need to do. We simply need to basically copy all of the CSS. And you notice I didn't take the style tag. That's HTML. We don't need it anymore. We just want the CSS. So I'm going to copy all of the CSS that we've created, everything all the way down to this closing curly bracket. Again, everything basically between the style tags. I'll copy that, and we're going to do is we're going to create a new page. So we're going to do a new page. We're going to just call it normal text, and we're going to Control-V to paste that code. Please note that in CSS, for an external page, you don't need anything to come before it. Simply the CSS rules by themselves is all that you need. Should you want to leave yourself some comments, you can do that if you'd like as well. Again, understanding CSS comments /* and then * is where you put comments. So you can put, created by me on date. Whatever you want to leave information, you can leave. You can leave it there. You can leave it above each. This area controls, the main container, whatever. Basically just good information for yourself later on in regards to basically the hows and whys that you created the CSS to begin with. You'll notice that all the information here is black at the moment. This is going to change when we actually go to save this page. So let's save the page, File, Save As. We want to save it in the same area with the test page, which you can't see that it's there, but the HTML page that we're working off of is in this area. We'll save the new CSS style sheet in that same area. We're going to name it simply style, and we're going to cause this to be a .css. So you can see that under save type, I've chosen CSS, and the file name is style. So the file is going to be style.css. And I've already got it in UTF-8 encoding, and I'll save it. And as soon as I did that, you'll notice that now all of the colors change back to what we were looking at inside of the XHTML page. So that's step one. Step two, we'll go back to the HTML, and now we'll get rid of all of the style information, including the style tags. This is going to make our pages a lot shorter. That's all we have now. I'll save that. Well, now we still have these styles. We didn't get rid of them. We have them. They're just on a separate page now, and we still have the HTML. But look what happens to the page when we refresh. Uh-oh, that's really ugly. What happened to all of our beautiful colors and our layout and everything? It's happened because no longer does the browser know how to style the page, because we've removed the CSS and moved it on this external page, and now there's a disconnect between the two. We need to put that connection back. So here's how that's done. We need a new statement, or a new tag, rather, a new element inside of the head area, which is here, and we'll put it right behind the last meta tag. And it's a link tag. We're telling it to link this page to a particular document, in this case a style sheet. So it starts with link. Next is REL for relation. What's the relation for this link? It's a, in quotes, style sheet. That's extremely important that you get that right. Again, if you're using Edit Plus, you will find out that there is, let's see here. You will find out that there is this clip text box And there's the ability to do all sorts of things, and I think it has link. It should inside of clip text. If it doesn't, it has it somewhere. I'm just so used to typing it, I guess. I don't even pay attention to it. But whether you copy it and paste it or click it from a button, regardless, it's a link tag. Again, the REL stands for relation equals style sheet. The type equals, go ahead.
It's an HTML. The link.
It's actually over in there. Oh, that makes sense because
Yeah.
it's an HTML tag. See, Jerry's so smart. Inside of the clip text, just so you know, for Edit Plus, there's HTML 4.01 if that's what you're coding. There's also XHTML 1.0. So since we're in XHTML, that would be the place to go. Let's just get rid of this and just do it that way then. So if you're using Edit Plus, you can go with the link tag, which is here, and you just double click it after you make sure that your cursor is where you want it to be, double click, and you get this. Okay, well, it's kind of cool. It tells you it's a link, but it doesn't tell you everything else. So that's okay. So there's different types of links, so that's why it can't know offhand. It's a style sheet. And you notice next I was typing the type. The type is text /CSS. That's the type of information that the browser can expect to find when it looks at this style sheet link. And the next is the hyperlink reference. Well, where is this page to be found? At the moment, we've named it style.css, and it lives inside of the same root area alongside with the HTML file. So that's all we need to add at this point. This now says as soon as it loads this page, in addition to loading the page content here, it's immediately supposed to go visit this other page, which it knows is a style sheet because of this, and it knows what type of code it's expecting to find because of this. It knows the name because of this. Go find style.css and load all of the style information and use that style information for this page. So with that, going back to this page and refreshing, bingo, we have a beautiful page again, aligned, or basically aligned and colored and styled exactly as we did in the previous. Now, I guess the next quick question is, well, why is that cool? Why is that better than simply leaving the style information all on the page just like you had it? And the reason that it's cool is a couple things. Number one, it's lightened the file size significantly for the HTML page itself. If we leave all the style information on the page, then every time we create a new page, that style information has to be used also. Well, that's redundant. It's the same code basically. Not that you can't have unique code on a page, you can, but if the code is the same, it's redundant. And basically, you're basically using up this extra code is causing extra file space, and it's unnecessary. So using an external style sheet basically allows that one document to be used across every single page of your site. So no longer do you have to have all of that style information on each page. The browser will retrieve it once through this statement, and then we'll use it for each page that basically calls it out. As long as the page that you're creating has this link tag that is attaching that style sheet to the page, it will use it. Lastly, I should point out that the link tag is another one that's self-closed. It's an empty element, and so to keep through validation, you'll need to make sure that you have the / at the end. All right, I see that we're at 1 o'clock. This is where I really wanted to end, but I want to do one other thing, and then we'll take questions. I want to talk just a teeny bit about path understanding, because this is something that comes up, I think, for almost every web designer developer, especially even those that are beginning and intermediate. Understanding of paths can trip just about everybody up. And as a matter of fact, just yesterday, Jared and I were working on something, and it tripped me up. So a path understanding is a very good thing. And here's what I mean. Very frequently, you will see that images and styles or CSS are placed into unique folders. So here's what we're doing. Let me temporarily get rid of the extraneous stuff. We don't need this. We don't need this at the moment. We don't need this. Okay, we've got duplicates. Let me just paste this here. Make sure I don't lose anything. I'm going to look at this a little bit more cleanly. Okay, so here's the actual HTML page that we're using. Here's the current external style sheet that we're using. Here's the header demo image. Here's the background image, and here's the order button image that's used for the PayPal button. Okay, that's all of the information or the elements that make up our particular web page. We need all of them. But what happens if we create a new folder and we name it CSS, and we take and we move this style sheet into it? This is very common, right? It's also common to have an images folder and have all of your images inside of it. I'm only going to just do the CSS for now. So what happens now is we're going to immediately encounter a problem. Our page is going to go back to being broken and looking ugly, and you see that that's happened yet again. So the question then is, well, why? You know, we are linking to our style sheet. So what's the problem? The problem is that this path now is no longer accurate. Now we have the style sheet inside of or contained inside of a directory or folder named CSS, all in lowercase. We have to tell it specifically where it is in order for it to find it and then be able to use it. So let's go back to the actual folder itself. Here is the HTML file that we're using. It was working perfectly when the style sheet was right here next to it in the same what's referred to as the root area along with the HTML page. But as soon as we moved it inside of this CSS folder, it broke. Well, the path then has to connect from this page to the style.css file that's contained inside of this folder. That's the path we're trying to create. We're trying to say, where is it? It's inside of this folder. This is referred to as down one level. So if you have a file here and you have a number of folders inside, if you're trying to come from this file and get inside of a folder and then access a file inside of it, you need to go down one level. And here's how this changes. We need to now tell it, instead of just the file itself, which would work fine if it was in the root, we need to tell it to go into the images. I'm sorry. I'm so used to doing that. We need to go into the CSS folder or directory, and then next, with that /, what to do after that. Once you get inside of the CSS directory, look for a file named style.css. So this is going to fix part of the problem. It can now find the CSS file again. So hey, guess what? We've got our header image back. We've got our layout back. But what happened to that background image? Where's that nice red and black background image? How come that didn't come across? And the reason is this. This image is being defined inside of the HTML. It's not being defined inside of the CSS document, the new style.css file that we created. Oh, and there's the title text that just popped up, just so you know what that title text is supposed to do, the title attribute that we created for the image. Similarly, the button down here is also defined in the HTML, not in the CSS. The image that we're missing, the background image, is being called out or identified in the CSS file, not in the HTML. So here's what I mean. Inside of the HTML file, again, we have the specific path to the header image. It's right there. Again, we're looking at the HTML file. Down here in the PayPal button, you'll notice that we have the image right here. The source is the add to cart button .png. again, assigned inside of the HTML. But that background image, if I tab over to the style.css file, is being called out inside of the CSS. So here's the problem. The problem is there's a broken path. It doesn't no longer know how to find this image. And this is why. Right now, it believes that this image, because of the type of path it is, without any extraneous information, it believes that this image is alongside this file in the root. By that I mean this. If we open the CSS folder, we see the style.css file. If that image were right here, also inside of the CSS folder, it would work. That's where it's looking for it. But it's no longer there. It's somewhere else. Well, where is it? It is, because I shouldn't have closed that. It's right here. So this is the next understanding. Before we went down a level, we started from a HTML page and we went inside of a folder. That's down a level. This time we need to do the reverse. We need to come outside of this file that's inside of a folder, and we need to come up a level to find this image. So we went down, now we need to come up. And the reason is, before we started from a file, went into a folder. This time we're coming from a file that's enclosed or inside of a folder. We're coming out of a folder, basically looking for a file. I'm hoping this really helps a lot of you, because path images are just so frequently prevalent. So here's how you come up a level. It's a double dot and then a /. All this says, this double dot / means to go up one level. And if you needed to go up multiple levels, you know, come outside of a folder and then outside of a folder, etc., you know, you might have 2 of those values. That says basically go up 2 levels and then look for a file. Right at the moment, though, we only need to come up 1 level, because we know that the style sheet is contained in the CSS folder, and if it comes up 1 level, gets outside of the folder, it's going to find the image. So we'll save this now, and let's see, we're saving it right there. We're going to replace it. And now, with the understanding that this image is found up 1 level, or basically get outside of the CSS folder and then look for it, oops, we should get our background image back. And now we have a completed page using an external style sheet. And in addition to that, we've gone 1 step further, and we put the style sheet in a folder or directory named CSS, and then taught you basically how to fix the paths. A lot of times what I see happen is people get really confused, and they'll look at their page, or they'll email us for support, and their page, let me just break this real quick. I'll just get rid of that CSS folder name so it can no longer find the style sheet. We'll get requests quite frequently, and people say, well, wait a minute, I don't understand. You know, my page looks like this. If you ever see a page looks like this, and you know that it shouldn't, it should be, you know, nicely styled, then there is some path issue, either to an image or a path issue to the CSS, etc. And that's the first thing that you need to look at. If you see all your content, but you just notice that all the style positioning and coloring and styling is gone, there is some path issue that's causing an issue to your style sheet. And putting that back again will fix it. So with that, Jerry, I am done. If you have